When I was a little boy, my parents and I used to go on holiday to my grandparents' house every year. After they retired, they moved to a small town far from the city to spend their remaining years in peace. Every summer we stayed there for a week or two. It was kind of fun at first, but became boring soon enough. I was too young, and my parents never let me out on my own. My days consisted of basking in the sun and strolling around the neighborhood with my grandparents. But I soon discovered a new source of fun. I began to dream of a boy of my age frequently. Interestingly, I was always aware that I was dreaming. Even more peculiar was that my dreams seemed to continue from where they left off. In the first dream, I simply met him by the side of the road and we played together. The next time when I dreamed of him, he greeted me happily and said, "You're back. Let's go out and play." Even though I didn't dream every night, each dream followed on seamlessly from the previous one. I even began to look forward to the coming of night because I felt that my real life began only after I entered my dream world. The boy and I quickly became good friends, exploring everywhere together. We swam in rivers, climbed trees, and did many things that my parents would never allow me to do when I was awake. When the holiday ended, and I returned to the city and never dreamed of him again. At first, I felt a bit lost, but I soon forgot about it. The following year, when we went back to visit my grandparents, I dreamt of the boy the very first night. He was both happy and reproachful, asking why I hadn't come to play with him for so long. Despite the year's absence, I recognized him immediately and hugged him excitedly, explaining that I didn't live there and only came for a short holiday during summertime. Although he was a little upset, he quickly forgave me and we played together again. I dreamt of him 4 or 5 times that holiday, almost every other night, which was much more often than the first year. Before I left, I made sure I said goodbye to him properly. The third year before I left the city, I was already looking forward to seeing him again. And just as I had hoped, I dreamt of him again. I ran up to him excitedly and bragged, "Look, I'm so much bigger than you now." He laughed and pulled me along as we hopped and skipped. The wonderful holiday didn't last long. Soon it was the day when I need to say goodbye to him again. He seemed very upset and hung his head in silence. After a while, he suddenly asked, "Why don't you stay? Stay and keep me company." I waved my hand and said I couldn't because my parents wouldn't approve. He said, "It's okay, I can help you. As long as you don't want to leave, you can stay." I hesitated, and he shook my hand and begged, "Please, just stay with me. Tomorrow, I'll take you swimming under the waterfall. It's so much fun." I started to waver because he always knew the best places. So I asked, "How long do you want me to stay with you?" He said firmly, "I want you to stay with me forever." That ended my hesitation. As much fun as it was with him, there were many interesting things to do in the city. The boy next door even promised to let me play his new games console when I got back. So I shook my head and said, "Sorry, I really can't stay. Let's play together next year." He looked at me and slowly let go of my hand, looking angry and sad. Then he turned and walked away without a word. I wanted to follow him and grab his shoulder, but for some reason, even though he was only a step ahead, I couldn't catch up. I watched him walk further and further away until he disappeared. That was the last time I dreamed of that boy. When I was older, I mentioned this experience to my parents. They were a bit surprised, but didn't take it too seriously, saying that I was at an imaginative age, and that life in the small town was boring, so maybe I had imagined a friend for myself. But I always wondered what would have happened if I had agreed to stay with him in that last dream. I wonder if anyone else has had a similar experience.
There's one thing that still sends shivers down my spine when I think about it. And to this day, I can't quite figure it out. A few years ago, I was renting a house on the outskirts of the city on my own. I don't go out much, just living a simple but relaxed life. The house I lived in was on a quiet street in a nice and safe neighborhood, and I didn't interact much with my neighbors, just nodding and saying hello when I saw them from a distance. That night, I checked and closed all the windows and doors as usual, then settled down under the covers and started my bedtime reading. Soon I fall asleep with my book, but a small noise woke me up. I rubbed my eyes and sat up in a daze, but soon I sensed that something was wrong. There were light footsteps coming from the kitchen and the sound of crockery gently touching. These sounds were obviously coming from inside the house. My heart began to beat furiously, and a thought occurred to me. Is there a burglar in the house? This thought got me sleepless immediately. I tiptoed out of bed, looked around, and grabbed a ceramic ornament, a makeshift weapon that gave me some courage. Holding my breath, I took a soft step in the direction of the sound. As I approached the kitchen door, I took several deep breaths before gathering my courage and burst in with a shout, and the weapon held high in my hand. Unexpectedly, a scream even more terrifying than mine came from across the room. By the light of the moon, I saw a skinny old woman standing in my kitchen, obviously frightened by me as well, holding one hand over her chest, almost on the verge of collapsing. I kept on shouting, "Who are you? And why are you here?" The old lady stammered and replied, I just wanted to borrow some eggs." I felt a mixture of confusion and anger, and the tension in my heart eased slightly as I looked at her tinny figure. But anger quickly took over. "What do you need eggs for in the middle of the night?" The old lady said. "I was cooking, and I ran out of eggs. I thought you might have some, so I've come to try my luck." I couldn't believe her words and said angrily, "How can you just come into someone's house? Please leave immediately." Surprisingly, her voice got angry too. "You obviously have eggs, so why can't you just lend me some?" I was so angry that I took a big step forward and pushed her towards the door, then shouted angrily as I pulled the door open, "Get out of my house!" The old lady looked at me grimly and said, "How dare you? Just wait. I'll take it myself anyway." Her expression was too horrible, and it woke me from my dream. I found myself lying on the bed with the book on my chest, and when I looked out, it was dawn already. I closed my eyes again for a while, but I could not sleep any longer, so I just got up. I was up early today, so I could have a nice breakfast. I stretched my legs and walked to the kitchen, intending to make myself some bacon and eggs. But when I opened the fridge, I froze. The eggs in the fridge were surprisingly all gone. I remembered very clearly that I had just bought a big carton of them the day before yesterday, so how could there be none left? Did the old lady in the dream really come back and took them all? Throughout my childhood, I frequently had a dream, or rather, a series of dreams. The setting of these dreams was generally the same, although the content varied from time to time. Timeline within these dreams was incredibly chaotic. Sometimes I'd be a teenager of 15 or 16, and other times I'd find myself back in my early childhood. In my dreams, I was the eldest daughter of a carpenter with 2 younger sisters and 2 younger brothers. We all wore exotic attire, somewhat reminiscent of the medieval Roman garb portrayed in TV shows. The people around us spoke a language I should not have understood in real life, but somehow I understood everything they said. I remember that my family in these dreams was exceptionally poor. My father, a carpenter, had a volatile temper and often lashed out at us children and our mother, which meant that I was constantly burdened with chores. As a result, waking from these dreams always left me feeling depressed. One memory that stands out is of a day when I took my brothers and sisters up the mountain to forage wild vegetables. We were very happy that day. I taught them about the wild plants we encountered along the way, including how to tell if a mushroom was poisonous. But when we returned home late, our father had another violent outburst. I shielded my siblings behind me and pleaded incessantly, driven by a desire to protect them from harm because they're too young. In essence, I felt a strong, almost maternal sense of responsibility. In reality, however, I was only 3 or 4 years old at the time, accustomed to being pampered by my parents and living in a state of innocence and spoil. Why I felt such emotions in my dream remains a mystery. Later, the dream version of me reached the age of 14. Despite our family's persistent poverty, my father surprisingly brought a new dress home for me. It was just a cheap floral dress, but the gesture filled me with both joy and anxiety. My father urged me to try it on, while my mother, standing to the side, secretly wiped away tears. My father, growing impatient, scolded her and threatened her with violence for interfering. What happened next unfolded like a scene from a television drama. I was sold by my father to a middle-aged man to become his wife. Amidst the cries of my mother and siblings, I was taken to my new home, embarking on a life that eerily mirrored my mother's, a cycle of work, childbirth, and abuse. And there was a funny incident in real life when my friends and I discussed how we came into the world. I explained the process to them in great detail, at least as much as my limited language skills allowed at the time. I illustrated the story with gestures and drawings to all my little friends. Later, when my mother found out, she was terrified and questioned me for a long time to see if I had experienced or saw anything bad. For some reason, I was obsessed with keeping the content of my dreams a secret, so I didn't tell my mother anything. By the time I was 5 or 6 years old, these dreams gradually became less frequent and eventually stopped altogether. I almost forgot about the whole thing as I grew older. Later, when I was at university, I met a friend from China who mentioned in passing that in their mythology, they believed in the continuous cycle of reincarnation, and that before each cycle, You had to drink a kind of soup to erase the memories of your past lives. It was then that I suddenly remembered my own dream. We discussed it for a long time and came to the conclusion that perhaps it was a memory from my past life that, for some reason, weren't completely erased.